Tom Campbell here. If you find something of significant value in our videos, please consider supporting their production through our Patreon account or through a one-time donation. The links are in the description below. Thank you and enjoy the video.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the 69th Fireside Chat with Tom Campbell, with thanks to Oliver in Germany and Justin in California. Let's start today with Eric and Carolyn.
Thank you, Donna. Hi, Tom.
Eric?
I have some questions today about spiritual awakening. So there's a phenomenon that is often referred to as spiritual awakening, which you also seem to describe in your book. You describe it as the realization that one is a unit of consciousness among many such units, regaining one's fundamental identity as a spiritual or non-physical entity, and understanding one's relationship and oneness with all consciousness. I have a few questions about this. So the first one is, this fundamental shift in identity seems to occur to some people in a temporary way, where the consciousness, after a period of a few seconds or hours or days or years even, reverts back to the dream state of being identified with a person or avatar. Whereas for other people, this shift occurs in a more permanent way, which is often referred to as abiding awakening. How would you explain this? And what advice would you give to people who experience this type of awakening only temporarily?
Well, when it's temporary, it hasn't taken root at the being level yet. It's being experienced. And a lot of people get this temporary experience. Often they'll go to a retreat of some sort where they'll spend 2 weeks of silence, meditating, 12 hours a day, sort of thing. And by the time they get toward the end of that, they feel very, very connected. They have, life-changing experiences. A lot of things will happen. But then a couple of weeks afterwards, kind of back to normal. They're sort of the same person they were before. It doesn't stay with them a long time. That's because if you spend a lot of time on it, kind of concentrate on it and focus on it over a fairly long time, pretty intensive with it, then you can get it at your being level to some extent, but you don't necessarily own it yet. Owning it, you have to spend some time living it, not just experiencing it in a retreat. You have to actually live it. And only through living it, I mean that, daily life for months, if not years, you live it, then you own it. It's yours permanently. Well, you can always de-evolve. I guess you could de-evolve out of it. But for the most part, that's the difference. It's the kind of the depth of the connection that it makes with you at your being level. Is it really a core part of you, or is it just something you've pulled down into that core temporarily because of your environment, because what you've been doing, because of how you've been focusing your mind, and then it doesn't last too long, which is the problem with most retreats. Many people go to these retreats and take these training courses, and they seem to be phenomenal while they're there, and maybe even for a short time afterward. But eventually, they return, and it's the same old self. Because in that retreat is a special, it doesn't have to be a retreat. It could be you go to a monastery, and spend, 6 months in a monastery. It could be all sorts of things, or maybe just in your own living room. Maybe you don't go anywhere. You just spend a lot of time in spiritual pursuits. Any of those things could do it. But when you put yourself in that situation, you take away all of the disturbances, all of the thoughts that are coming out of your ego. and your beliefs. Okay, now in daily life, you meet people, things happen, you get rained on, you're late for your appointment and you get hollered at, all kinds of things happen to you. And those things then will trigger an ego response, which comes from fear. Or they'll trigger a belief of some sort, which comes from the fear. Well, you put yourself, basically in a closet, whether it's at a retreat or a monastery or in your own house. If you closet yourself away, then you're removing all that. You don't have those things coming in, pushing your buttons, trying your ego, that sort of thing. So you go back to normal life, and pretty soon, there's life kind of overwhelms you. And now you get back to normal because you have to deal with all those things. That's why you have to live it. If you can stay in that state and live it without living in a cave and without living in your closet, without living in your, in your monastery, but actually get out, be part of life, relationships, have a job, do the things, take on responsibilities, and then you still can maintain it, well, then you own it. And it's yours for life. So that's typically, if you get very special circumstances where you take all the stressors away, then it's a little easier to get there and stay there for a while until you get back into life and the stressors all reoccur. So that's why it does that. So what advice would I give to people? When you have a profound experience, be it in a, because you're closeted and you've taken yourself out of the space where you get triggered with your ego and beliefs or not. But once you get in that space, hold on to it. Keep thinking about it. Keep yourself tied to that space. So as you get out now and go back to your job and go back to your family and go back to your problems that you have and the relationships and responsibilities, keep that in mind. Keep that same feeling, that same attitude. Keep it with you. Hang on to it. It'll be a little difficult. It'll slip away from you for an hour or two, but reach out and get it, pull it back. In other words, try to stay in that profound space of calm and quiet and peace, tranquility, centeredness. Stay in that centered state. And if you take it with you wherever you go, eventually it will become your normal state. So I often tell people when they have a peak event in one of my courses or something, I say, hang on to it. Don't let that go. Keep it there. Keep re-feeling it, revisiting it. Hang on to those feelings and do that for months. You really have to work at it. It's not an easy thing to do. It's easier just to slip back into life and forget about it. But if you hang on to it, that will help you make that transition to where you own it rather than just had a wonderful experience, but then it's gone.
All right, thank you. That's very useful. My second part of the question was, what role does this spiritual awakening play in our process of spiritual evolution? So how essential is spiritual awakening to our spiritual evolution? Is this a shift that unavoidably will happen at one point during one's evolution? Or is it not necessary or essential? MBT appears to be more focused on getting rid of fear, ego, and belief, and a bit less focused on this particular spiritual phenomenon. However, there are teachings and traditions such as Zen Buddhism that focus primarily on getting people to achieve this spiritual awakening. So what is your take on that?
Your first one, it's not really necessary or essential. It is one path. And typically it's a path where you can intensively focus on attaining that awakening. If you have that situation, if you go to a Zen monastery or something, then they will have processes there, things that you do that will help you come to such an awakening. Okay, in that case, then that's a good process. But let's say you don't have a Zen monastery nearby, and you have a job that you have to work and you can't get away from, and you have, 3 children, a wife and in-laws that are just moved in with you, and that's your life. Okay, well, now going to a Zen monastery is probably something you'd really like to do at that point, but you have to be there and handle the responsibilities that are yours rather than escape to something easier. So in that case, it's not essential. It's not necessary. You can evolve in basically any situation that you find yourself in. And if you evolve in your normal situation, it probably will take more time. It probably isn't as quick, but it will be easier to retain it, because as you grow, it's you're living it, and you have the advantages of being challenged all the time. So I think when you do finally make it, though it takes longer, you're actually more solid in your understanding. You're more solid in your becoming love, because all along, as you've grown up, you had all of these challenges, things you've had to deal with, situations. You weren't closeted somewhere. So you had to come the hard way. Takes longer, but it's more, I don't know, it's more lasting. It's more solid. You own it more when you can create this spiritual space for yourself in the midst of your everyday life. So I don't really recommend for people to go out and leave their ordinary life, because the probability is that the attainment that they get while cloistered will wane, will go away with time, unless they spend a whole lot of time with it. And they remain in that monastery, then okay, they can keep it for a long time because they're never really challenged that much. Maybe that makes the people in the monastery seem very, very spiritual. But I think developing your spirituality in the context of an ordinary life is really a better way to go, because you will own it more solidly at the end. But it is going to take you longer. So if you want to do it more quickly, then retreats and cloistering and joining a monastery may get you there sooner, but it won't necessarily be as deep. You won't own it as well. How many of those monks come out of that monastery and get out into the world and actually have to go take a job to pay their way and have families and do all that sort of thing and still maintain their spiritual space? Probably not very many. They're not that solid. But if you gain it in that everyday space, then you're pretty solid with it. So that's kind of the difference. Depends on what you're trying to accomplish. What are you trying to accomplish? If you want to get there quickly and you're going to live in a protected space, then by all means, put everything else aside and go join a monastery. If if that's not the life for you, then just work on it, whatever you do. Doesn't matter. Whether you're poor and rich, whether you do things that are full of chaos, you may be in somebody that deals with chaos every day. You may work as a doctor in an emergency room. Well, that's chaos. That's high stress chaos. The decisions you make are life and death decisions, and you make 100 of them a day. A lot of chaos, but you can still find spiritual space even doing things that are chaotic and high stress. It just takes a little more time, and you have to learn to focus even in the midst of all that chaos. So that's really the difference. Different what do they say? Different strokes for different folks. You know, it depends on what you're after and what's important to you. Is it speed or quality, or you want a full life of doing all sorts of things because that's more challenging to you? You'll grow more depth to your person. You'll have more experience than if you're cloistered. Now your experience is very limited. You don't have the same, breadth of experience as somebody who's not.
In fact, there's many stories of great spiritual teachers who write great books on spiritual awakening, and at least from my perspective, their experience is very genuine and they really seem to know what they're talking about. Yet you hear stories about them committing all sorts of immoral acts, or making mistakes like that. So I guess that's one of the costs that comes with leading a very secluded life and focusing only on spirituality and spiritual awakening.
Right. That would be a risk. Your spirituality doesn't have a lot of depth to it. It's not as robust. Let's put it that way. But yet you can talk the talk very well because intellectually you understand it, and even experientially you understand it. And you may train yourself to do, telekinesis things or other kinds of things that, impress people. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have an awful lot of room to grow. So yes, there's any number of stories where people who were genuinely very spiritual did understand, had a deep understanding, but a deep understanding that's largely intellectual and emotional is not the same as one that has been earned, in the middle of chaotic life. There's just a difference between those two.
All right. So I had a third part to this. I hope I'm not taking up too much time. But is this spiritual awakening where the identity shifts back into the consciousness and away from the identification with the person or the avatar, is that spiritual awakening dependent on or affected by the avatar that the consciousness is locked onto? So, for example, is spiritual awakening more accessible to IUOCs locked onto healthy human avatars than it is to IUOCs locked onto animals or humans suffering from some sort of mental or intellectual disability?
Well, if it's not extreme, if we take extremes, it's a different answer than if we don't take extremes. Okay, if you have an avatar, and that avatar is of, average intelligence, has an average job and an average income, and, lives an average life, then that's no impediment to spiritual growth. If that avatar has, let's say, defective brain chemistry, so it has ADD or, obsessive compulsive disorders, or it has a lot of phobias or other kinds of things that might be, they could be genetic, they could just be bad luck when it comes to, the egg and sperm and all the various possibilities and combinations. They may just end up with some bad brain chemistry. Things didn't quite work out right. In that case, then there are some limitations that come with that. Okay. Now, the limitation is that from that perspective of that individual, remember, this person that's here is logged on to that avatar. And that avatar sets constraints on what that consciousness can do with that avatar. So if that avatar is, I don't know, we'll take something more dramatic. That avatar is mentally retarded. Then that consciousness that's logged onto that mentally retarded avatar can only do so much as far as its ability to manipulate ideas and facts, and its level of understanding now is limited by an avatar that's mentally retarded. It doesn't mean the consciousness is mentally retarded. It means the consciousness can't process its information any better than what the avatar allows it to process. And that avatar, of course, is a product of the rule set. So there's a basic, that's the basic thing. If you play a virtual reality game, even though you understand what your character needs to do, you understand that the way to get, to get through the maze is here, first you do this and that, and you have to do the other thing, and you just need to get past the doorway where the monster is. And you may understand that well, but doing it has a lot to do with your character. Does that character have enough hit points? Does that character have enough armor? Does that character have enough speed? Does that character, on and on and on, which are attributes of the avatar, not of the consciousness. So if you don't have enough attributes from the avatar to do these things, then even though the consciousness may be perfectly clear on what has to happen and how it has to happen and understands a lot, it can't get that avatar to perform any better than what the attributes of the avatar are, because that avatar has to work within the rule set. So it's the same sort of thing. So a consciousness that's logged on to somebody with severe dysfunction has got to deal with that severe dysfunction. And he's limited to what he can process as to what that avatar can process. So now he does have the ability to make some changes. He does have the ability to, let's say the avatar is not really mentally retarded. He just grew up in a closet and was never taught anything. He was raised by wolves, something like that. And he just never got socialized or, learned anything. Maybe he's illiterate and that sort of thing. But that avatar can work with that. If that's a pretty grown-up avatar, that avatar can work with that. And rather than just feel sorry for himself because he's not like everybody else, a grown-up avatar would then start to fill in the things that he's missing and work on it and focus on it. So the avatar, the conscious can affect some of what the avatar does, and the consciousness can, to some degree, manipulate the rule set, manipulate the biology. It might be able to modify the brain chemistry to some extent, but again, only in as much as the uncertainty allows. So if the dysfunction is caused by something that has a lot of uncertainty in it, then the consciousness may just be able to modify that. But now the uncertainty is the uncertainty that comes with the rule set, you see. Whereas if it isn't something that has any uncertainty with it, your thyroid gland just doesn't work, or you don't have one, you had to have it removed because it was cancerous, then that may affect other things in your body that the consciousness isn't going to just grow you a new thyroid gland, because the probability of that is very, very low. There's very little uncertainty about that. You see, so it's stuck there. So there's a big gray area of, it could affect them a little bit, or it could affect them a lot, or it could, depending on what the cause of the dysfunction is and the ability of the consciousness to work with whatever he has to work with and help get around it, help refocus it. Unfortunately, the brain is a very plastic entity. So if part of the brain doesn't work well, usually with a little effort, you can reroute those problems and that function to other parts of the brain, can pick that function up. But that would only be if it had a consciousness that focused on doing that and achieving that end. So if your consciousness was pretty low entropy, it might be able to focus on achieving that end. If the consciousness were higher entropy, it may just run around going, oh no, why me? Oh no, why me? And it wouldn't focus on anything. So depends on a lot of variables there.
Yeah, thank you. That does make sense. It was a little bit confusing for me because when that happens, that sort of shift in perspective, there's a sense of, oh, what I am is not dependent on this avatar thing. And so there's this sense of, as if it's entirely independent of it, but I guess that's not the case. In a sense, you need the avatar in order to be able to realize the fact that you're beyond it. So it's kind of confusing in that way, but I think we should clarify that.
Okay, but see, we get to a point, let's say that the avatar is not an impediment. That's that normal avatar with normal intelligence and normal lifestyle and so on. That avatar doesn't form any sort of impediment. So it doesn't really provide any serious limitations to the consciousness. So the consciousness can feel pretty free to develop and become whatever it can become. So that's why I said it depends on what the problem is. So in that case, the consciousness may feel like it's independent. Well, it is independent of the avatar. In a way, it's consciousness. It's part of the larger consciousness system. It's not organically a piece of the avatar, but as long as it's logged into this virtual reality, it can't process or be or do things that the rule set as embodied by its avatar, can't do things that doesn't allow. So that's the thing. But there's very little. An avatar has to be pretty seriously compromised before it would seriously compromise the consciousness and what it could do. So even a mentally retarded individual could grow quite a bit. The consciousness could evolve quite a bit because a retarded person has challenges, has issues they have to deal with. Another way of thinking of it, Eric, is think about decision space. Okay, if your avatar is a dog, then your decision space is very small. If your avatar is mentally retarded, your decision space is relatively small. If your avatar is extremely bright, is a genius, and very healthy, and very fit, now your decision space is much bigger. You see, and the bigger your decision space, the more choices you have. The more choices you have, we can say the easier it is to evolve the quality of your consciousness. You can evolve into a greater space with more choices. So you can look at it that way, that basically the dysfunctional avatar limits the decision space in which the consciousness can operate. But unless that's pretty severe, the consciousness can evolve quite a bit in any of those cases. The first question you asked about, we talked about whether you were closeted or not, whether you're, or I guess the word's really cloistered or not, is the same thing. When you remove yourself from society in general, your decision space goes down. You lose the richness of those choices. That's just another way of looking at the same problem. You have less decision space when you're in a monastery because you get up every morning when the bell rings, you do this, you do that, you wash the dishes, you clean out the latrines, you go to meditation, you do this, and you kind of on a schedule and you go through the process and your decision space is relatively small because you've got routines, you've got things that you do. And that's a problem. In some ways, that makes everything easier. In other ways, that makes things harder.
All right, thank you very much, Tom. That clarifies it for me.
I wanted to ask, I sort of have a practical question. So whenever I'm triggered, I can sort of like find, like whenever I'm triggered, it's basically because of out of an irrational reason. So intellectually, I can understand that it makes no sense to be triggered, right? So I sort of tell myself that, and then I think that I've understood it, but then a few weeks later I get triggered by the same thing. So I was sort of wondering, yeah, like how do I notice that I don't just shove things under the rug and I deal with them?
Well, for one, you have to be patient with yourself. You're not going to, most of the fears that you will have that will create a trigger are things you've been carrying around for most of your life. So you'll have, 30 years worth of carrying around that fear, and you can't just drop it off one day because you find it inconvenient. Oh, I shouldn't have said that. See, that's causing a lot of trouble. I just get rid of that. It doesn't work like that. You've been carrying this fear around for a long, long time. You've gotten it out of your culture. It's come out of the air. It's a part of you. So pulling it up by the roots and getting rid of it is going to take some time. It's not going to be a fast process. Now, for some people, sometimes they can make it a fast process. And some people can get to the root of something and say, I see it, and I see why I'm like that, and I see what it is, and I don't want to be that way, and it's gone. But that is not the way most people experience it. Some people do experience some issues like that, get rid of it quickly. Mostly, we catch ourselves being triggered, being irrational, having these feelings. We know that it's irrational. And instead of saying, I don't want to act that way, which carries very little power, you need in your mind to say, I don't want to be that way. And then take 30 seconds right at that time to repeat that 10 times. I don't want to be that way. Put some oomph into it. Put some energy into it. Think about it. You can just think a little 30-second meditation, and tell yourself, I don't want to be that way. And get it as deep as you can into the feeling. Put some power behind it. And then 2 weeks later, you'll do the same thing. You'll trigger on the same thing. And you do the same thing. You said, there I am again. I don't want to be that way. So take 30 seconds or a minute and impress on yourself that you don't want to be that way. And just keep doing that. And you'll find that, all right, the first 10 or 15 or 20 times, it won't seem to be working because you just keep getting triggered in the same way. But you will find that eventually that triggering will get less and less. Whereas before you got really upset, now you only get sort of upset. And then maybe 4 or 5 months after that, you just get a little upset. And then after that, it's gone. It doesn't upset you at all. The trigger has gone away. But it will take time, and you have to just keep pushing on it and working with it. But just having that intent that you don't want to be that way will lead you to do all the right things to get rid of it, to not be that way. So you need to stick with it, keep working on it. Sometimes it helps people to go back and look at the root cause, the root fear. What is it? You feel not good enough, or you feel inadequate. Those don't have to be the same thing. And if that's the case, or you feel frightened, or the world is scary, or whatever, not taken seriously, that you might be abused or taken advantage of, whatever the fear is, if you can find it, then you can spend some time in a meditation session going to that fear and dispelling it. Sometimes you have to experience it first. Let's say you feel fearful that you would be abused, that you would be, misled or taken advantage of. And that's a fear you have. Well, go back and see, where did that fear come from? Why did you feel that way? Where did you pick up that fear? You know, do you have a long history of being taken advantage of and of abuse? And go back and look at those things. Even if you say, oh yeah, I've been, taken advantage of a lot, go back and look at those things and see how it wasn't just that somebody took advantage of you, but you played into that situation. It was partly you too. Your choices is why you got taken advantage of, not just the other person. And then you have to go visit those things. And why did you make those choices? You see? So sometimes working backwards to it can be very helpful, because all the time you're working back through history with it, you're also putting intention into not being that way. So that just becomes, so these are some of the things that you can do to get rid of it. But you will get rid of it if you keep working on it. If you can, not give up, you will succeed. And don't get angry with yourself when you catch yourself doing it, because anger now is another negative thing. And that will just feed negative feelings about yourself. So you just need to recognize it. And without anger, don't get upset with yourself. Just say, I don't want to be that way. Why am I that way? Where do these choices come from? You see, don't get upset with it. If you get aggravated with yourself, then you're actually feeding the negative. Well, I hope that helps a little, Caroline.
Oh yeah, that helps a lot. Thank you very much. And then there was like a little funny thing I was wondering, that dogs, they dream, right? But could like a dog also have like a lucid dream, or a bumblebee? Like, let's say if like an IUOC is logged into a bumblebee, could it also have an out-of-body experience, like be constrained here but be fully aware in NPMR?
Well, I don't know why not. It is consciousness. It's just consciousness with a very limited decision space. So it's going to function and operate like any consciousness. It just has to do so in a limited decision space. So I don't see any reason why a dog couldn't have a lucid dream, or, get data out of the database, or, communicate telepathically, or remote view, or do any of those things. It's consciousness. These are just the attributes of consciousness. So all that should be available to anything that's conscious, including the bumblebee. But they have to do that within the confines of a very small decision space. I don't know how big a bumblebee's decision space is, but it probably doesn't have a long list of choices. Most of its choices are probably hardwired. It's just the way it is. You could call that instinct if you like. It's just hardwired into their DNA to do the things they do and feel the way they feel. But within the context of its decision space, I don't see why it wouldn't be able to do anything that any consciousness could do. But it's a very limiting context.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, Armand, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Hi, Tom.
Hello, Armand.
Nice to be here. I think it was like 12 years ago I first found you on YouTube and then ordered you a book. It's had a great impact on my life. Thank you for that.
Welcome.
My first question is related to strategies to reduce fear and become love. In life, it seems that people easily end up in destructive patterns and have a hard time getting out of them. In some cases, I think people feel anxiety because of their actions and what they have manifested in their own life. And they see that it becomes a negative spiral. Once when I was in a meditative state, I asked the question of why we humans are so judgy. And I saw that many people have self-hatred. And because of that, they turn their focus to other people to hide their anxiety of not liking themselves. So they hate others that are flawed because of that themselves are flawed. So my first part of the question is if you think the LCS is developing new ways for people to become love. Maybe there are some ways to collaborate that haven't happened yet in a larger scale. An example would be if people had regular dreams that they can view and see situations from other perspectives, other points of view, and maybe can accelerate development. Have you thought about things that LCS can improve?
Yes, in a general way, the larger conscious system works with us to the extent that we are available to be worked with, the extent that we can understand and make use of what it does. So if we are a very high entropy individual, then the system, has different choices, different tools it's going to use to work with us. If we're a very low entropy individual, high quality of consciousness, then the system can work with us in different ways. We have a larger decision space. It can interact with us in ways that are appropriate for us. So all the help and the interaction you get from the LCS is custom fit to you. It's not just a general thing for everybody, but it's custom fit to you. So as humanity grows up and has a higher quality of consciousness, the way the system will interact with us or can interact with us will change. Absolutely. So it depends on us as to how we interact and how it interacts with us. So, for example, people who, there are people who would say that they've never experienced anything paranormal, that they've never, had any non-physical entities they've ever chatted with. The guides never talked to them, even though they intellectually understand all that and how it works and even believe it. It just never happens. Why won't my guides talk to me? They talk to other people, but they won't talk to me. Why is that? Well, for the most part, that's because you're not ready for that conversation yet. And that's why. So the system already differentiates person to person and treats us in ways that are appropriate for us. So eventually, when you get to have a higher quality of consciousness, you'll find all kinds of things that others might consider paranormal. They happen to you every day. Your whole life becomes a string of odd things that happen, synchronicities, just fall out of the air. The things you need just materialize and you get them. But if you're not ready for that, then that doesn't happen to you. Because if you're not ready for that, you just say, wow, what good luck. Okay, I'm going to enjoy this. But if you are ready, you say, wow, it's really amazing how this larger system can be helpful to me. You see it in a different context. So in one case, your context is all about you. It's a self-centered context. And the context is one of opening your mind and seeing things from a bigger picture. So, yes, it depends on the individual person. Go ahead. You had more parts to that question.
Yes, I think you actually answered the second part, but my second part was if the IUOC can get frustrated with the free will awareness unit's destructive patterns and try to communicate and help, for example, like a parent trying to coach a child in the right directions. But I think, you answered that.
The system will do what it thinks is most likely to succeed for you. So if you're a person and you may be a very bright person and you may have a high position of authority and all sorts of other things, but you may be totally committed to materialism And if you can't measure it, it doesn't exist. And anything that anybody thinks exists that they can't measure, well, they're just having a hallucination. And if you have that kind of an attitude, like many scientists would have that attitude, then there's not a whole lot the system's going to do. Because if it tries to give you something to wake you up, you'll just brush it off and deny it. You won't deal with it. You'll refuse to process it. So people like that go through their life and never see any of these paranormal things, or never have experience with synchronicities, or telepathic conversations, or precognitive dreams. And there's no point in pushing any of that on them because they won't deal with it. So yeah, the system does what it thinks, how it can help us. And some people, there's just not much they can do to help. That person just has to grow up some and get a little more open-minded before they can be helpful.
Yes, thank you. I have another question. It's about my job. It's very fun and creative. I get the opportunity to explore myself and dive into other perspectives a lot, and it's very fun. But the industry I'm in is in many ways kind of rough. It's like a marketplace where you have to pitch yourself and talk about yourself all the time, and I work a lot with trying to let go of expectations and being in the moment, but I still have to focus on my goals to survive in this industry. So it's kind of difficult sometimes to balance the work life because it takes up so much time and energy. So I was wondering, like, if you have any empathy perspective on how to find balance in one's profession when an industry like this kind of almost is little narcissistic in kind of way.
Yeah, I can help you a little here. It's not the actions that count, it's the intention. Okay, so if you're in a job and that job requires you to be all about yourself, be self-promoting in order to go someplace in this job, but you have to convince other people how great you are, and you have to constantly do that, otherwise you'll fall off to the sideline, and that just seems to be the job you're in. Then you can do that, but not in the context of that being a reflection of who you are, but in a context of you're just acting in a role, if your job requires it. Now, if your job requires you to do something unethical, now that's different. Now, if you've got a job that says, oh, you need to steal this money, you need to, turn in fraudulent reports or whatever, well, now you got a different problem. And that problem, you start looking for another job, find something else to do, and try to get out of that situation as soon as you can, in a way that you can still survive, still pay your rent, still put gas in your car, still, take care of your family, but you get out of it and you try to avoid doing those things. If those things only happen to people who advance, if the underlings can be honest people and be ethical, but the higher up you get, the less ethical you're supposed to be, then you can always decide not to accept a promotion. You can stay down at a level where you don't have those kinds of issues to deal with. So there's other ways, you can deal with that, but that's different. If it's just a matter of, say, having to promote yourself all the time, and that feels very egotistical, well, if you did it for the reason that you were trying to impress people, it would be egotistical, because that would be you doing it. It comes out of a space of needing people to think highly of you. That's a need of yours. That comes from a fear of, you're fearful that people won't think highly of you. But if you do it just because it's an act that you put on at work, then it doesn't cause you any difficulty. It doesn't drop your spiritual level and whatever. It's just the way you have to act at work. At work, you have to, promote yourself all the time, because that's the nature of the workplace that you're in. So it depends on your your intent. If your intent's egotistical, then yeah, that's an egotistical thing. If your intent's not egotistical, then it's not. So you can act in many ways. You know, the females who have gone into the workplace have to deal with this sort of thing all the time, because the workplace used to pretty much be a dominantly male place. And to come into a workplace that's dominantly male, particularly, let's say, in an industry that's engineering, where there are very few females, the females that do come into that place have to put on an act. They don't act the same way at home that they act at work. There's two different personas they carry. When they walk into work, they're tough-minded, engineers who get the job done, and so on and so on. That's how they act. And if somebody says something they disagree with, they get right back and fuss about it and complain. Well, you don't know what you're talking about. They get very direct, and what they do is they act more masculine because that's what that situation demands. The whole situation is built up around, kind of masculine interactions. So they tend to act that way. But when they leave the office, they don't act that way. So they have a problem of kind of having one personality at home and another personality at work. It's just the thing that they have to deal with because that's the way their workspace is. Now, it doesn't make them do things that are unethical, and it doesn't make them do things that are wrong or anything. It just makes them kind of shift gears when they're at work. They may be much more aggressive and much more demanding and much more argumentative at work. But that works for them at work. They may not be that way at home. And if they can juggle that split personality, if they can juggle that and keep the two separate, then they can be very successful both places. If they can't juggle that, and now they take that tough, engineering attitude back home with them, now there's problems. You see? So you're kind of in the same thing. You don't want to change who you are. You want to grow spiritually. You want to keep doing that. And as long as you don't let that environment at your work change you, you just put on an act to work there, then okay, you can get by with that. Now, it would be nice if you could find a job where you didn't have to act. That would be more pleasant, and maybe you'll keep your eyes open for that. But sometimes we don't always get to choose where we can work and what industry we're in. We have certain skills and talents, and that puts us in certain spaces. And we have to deal with those spaces positively. So instead of those spaces getting you down and making you feel bad, you have to do what you need to do as long as it's ethical and be positive, get your job done, interact the way you have to interact, but don't let it affect who you are internally. Know that it's just an act and don't let it bring down the rest of your life. So workspaces are like that. There's a lot of people who go to work and put on a whole different personality when they walk through the door and then take that personality off again later. And there's others that don't succeed. They put that new personality on, and after a while, they take that new personality home too. And it changes them, who they are, and knocks them really off the course of their development because they are now living to an image rather than being authentic. So stay authentic to yourself, but do what you have to do at work, and don't let the work make you unhappy. Just say that's the way you have to be at work, and that's okay. That's just the way it is. I'll keep my eye out for better work, so I don't have to do that. But as long as you're stuck there, then make the best of it. Be successful. Compete successfully with the other people who are all promoting themselves so that you can, learn the game you can figure the game out, you know, with the best of them. And actually you have an advantage in the game, because if you have intuitive skills as well that you've developed on the spiritual side, then you'll know things that they won't know. You'll be a good competitor, probably better than the others, because you've got more depth to your character and more information and a bigger decision space to work with. So you can be successful at doing those things as long as you don't run into somebody asking you to be unethical. And actually for the company, that would actually be a very good thing. Most companies would really benefit by having some people work their way up in the company who had a lower entropy, who had a bigger picture view of things. So we'd all benefit from people being in the upper echelons of corporations who had bigger pictures. And probably the only way to get there is if you're a good actor, because that's the only way you're going to move up into that position. So think of yourself as a guerrilla fighter. You know, you stay undercover.
Yeah, that was very insightful. Thank you. The fun thing is that actually the work is very creative in itself, but the other stuff around the work is making the right connections and getting the right people to see my work, and like yeah. So yeah, it has the both worlds actually. Yeah.
Yeah, you can live in both worlds.
Thank you.
Tom Campbell here. INMBT Events hope you liked this video. We now have well over 1,000 hours of free video on this user-friendly, ad-free YouTube channel. Though these videos are free to our viewers, they represent many thousands of hours in production and editing, and many thousands of dollars invested in video and audio equipment, along with the required computers and software to store and process the raw video into finished products. So far, all of this content has been funded directly out of our own pockets. Be assured, we will always continue to do what we can. It's our life, our purpose, a labor of love that we will continue to pursue as best we can. However, those pockets are not as deep as they used to be. Thus, we are now seeking to augment our resources with support from our viewers. If you find something of significant value in our videos, please consider supporting their production through our Patreon account or through a one-time donation. The links are in the description below. Thank you.